Warning, this video contains topics of discrimination, slavery, racism, sexism, homophobia, graphic images, and the current political climate. Although I will try to avoid these as much as possible, I will inevitably have to tackle them a lot throughout as they are main sections of American history. Overall, viewer discretion is advised. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please remain standing for a moment of silence. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and of course, good night, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another video. I'm your host, the Gaming Minecart, and today we celebrate the 250th anniversary for the United States of America. This will be counted as an A Decade in Review video because of its video style. However, it will be a far more solemn and serious video than the rest of the series because of its theme. As much as I would love to make jokes about this stuff, I can't make fun of the needless slaughter of countless minorities for the sake of industry and glorious power. It just won't stand on this channel anymore. Also, disclaimer, I am making this based off of the information I have from AP World History, Honors Civics, Honors Economics, and the research that I have done for this video. I am not a history teacher. I am 16. My information is not from a PhD. Take everything I say with a grain of salt and pepper. I simply wish to show my gratitude for this great state we live in, no matter how bad it might be at the moment. With all that out of the way, let's begin this video formally with the American Revolution. Our journey begins on the night of April 19th, 1775. Tension over the past half of a decade of rule in the 13 colonies has been tightening quickly. The Boston Massacre and Tea Parties were the first signs that this arrangement wouldn't hold and that observation would be correct. In Lexington, during a Redcoat American standoff, someone fired. To this day, we have no clue who fired the shot heard around the world, but that was more than enough a declaration for both sides that this ended here and now. The American Revolution had begun. Lexington and Concord were both American losses due to the superiority of the British militias and not knowing that a war was going to start, but it wasn't long before the colonists got back at them. At the Battle of Bunker Hill, except it was on Breed's Hill, despite being a colonist loss on paper as they retreated, the Americans killed or wounded half of the British militia that was sent there before then. This was a show that the Americans would not give up nearly as easily as the British thought. South Carolina defends its coast the day after my birthday on June 28, 1776 from British invaders, and loyalist groups are squashed throughout the colonies slowly but surely. On July 4, 1776, the United States of America was born. Still needing to win against their former oppressors, George Washington crosses the Delaware River on Christmas night to take the encampment of Prussian mercenaries across from them. In the Battle of Trenton, Washington succeeds, bringing immense morale to the colonist cause. America doesn't stop, however, and sets the British back hard at Saratoga, capturing 6,000 soldiers and enticing France to join the war. At Valley Forge, Baron Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben helps train Washington's army, and in 1778, France joins the American Revolution against the British. The Redcoats take Charleston in hopes to destroy the American morale, but victory swings again and again and again in Kings Mountain, Cowtons, and finally, Alexander Hamilton, Marquis de Lafayette, and the French naval force destroy the British troops at Yorktown. The American Revolution ends with Britain signing the Treaty of Paris, one of many, and the world turned upside down. The Articles of Confederation and the Constitution. The United States needed a government. Since it wanted to function with its freedom ideas, it would not accept anything the people did not participate in. Therefore, a democracy, the government of voting, was chosen by the Founding Fathers. A government system that had not been seen since the ancient Greeks. And the country lived when the Articles of Confederation were ratified as the official laws of the state for 8 years. The Articles were pretty pointless as they gave almost all of the power to the government of the states and almost none to the actual federal government due to fear of having Britain to electric boogaloo. Taxes were irrelevant, Congress was chased out by the army, and even worse, the states kept arguing over the land beyond the colonies that was given to them by the Treaty of Paris. Thus, over the span of a few long years, the Articles were democratically removed in favor of a new document, the U.S. Constitution. You probably may recall from your civics class, the Federalist Papers, the 85 essays in the span of 6 months. Hamilton wrote 51. If you know, you know. This actually gave the federal government power while still keeping the people in control of who gets into office for the most part. George Washington became the first president, and thus the United States, as we know it, begins its reign. The Constitution idea and the whole basis of the Constitution would go on to be adopted by many a nationalist rebellion across the 1800s and 1900s, and the U.S. would add many amendments to give people more rights.
27 is not many.
But we'll get to those later. For now, we get to talk about the War of 1812. In 1804, the United States more than doubled their land area with the Louisiana Purchase. The controversy surrounding this Napoleonic decision was debated up until the 1860s. Since the Constitution was ratified, Native American tribes had been losing ground to the American settler horde fast. These various actions had worried the British, and they were already stretched thin in Europe with Bonaparte-shaped problems. America had a bloodlust for territory, and on June 18, 1812, Canada was next. Unfortunately for the Pan-Americana dreamers, America sucks. Canada held their own with almost no assistance from Britain, and America failed all of their offensives time and time again. When Britain did arrive, the only things they did was land in Washington, D.C. and burn down the White House, and lose a battle in New Orleans, and in 1815, the most forgotten actual war in American history ended in a stalemate. Not too long after, the Oregon Territory was split on the 49th parallel, and the Pig War nearly broke relations between the giants. I'll link the oversimplified video to that in the description, because I don't feel like explaining that. The Mexican-American War.
Texas was a rowdy little guy.
Mexico had been falling apart since its independence in 1821. They lost Central America and were incredibly underpopulated. Mexico would soon learn that this isn't the last land they'll lose. Alamo happened, Texas got mad and declared independence from Mexico for 5 years before joining the US. Mexico at this time still claimed Texas as their territory. Uh-oh. Mexico gets pissed at America for annexing Texas, America laughs in Mexico's face, and Mexico declares war after the US sends troops into Texas and then into Mexican territory. Mexico stood no chance against the Manifest Destiny-fueled giant and folded not too long after realizing that America had stolen their capital city, and if they made their way to the Yucatan Peninsula, they would not survive. Mexico lost all of Texas along with New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Nevada, and California. But not Baja California, because that was just too much for the Americans. We could move on to the Civil War, but since it was brought up, let's talk about Manifest Destiny. This was the ideology that the United States was destined by God himself to spread the power, glory, and influence of the American dream from the Atlantic to the Pacific. This was a good ideology of nationalism at heart, but was also, as well as the Monroe Doctrine, that may be a whole separate video, cited to justify a slew of horrible shit such as the misplacement and slaughter of the many natives east of the Mississippi and the institution of slavery. This idea was abandoned after the Civil War due to this, however, and Manifest Destiny stayed a part of history for the rest of time. The American Civil War. Abraham Lincoln is the first Republican in America. He wins the 1860 presidential election by a landslide, and the majority of the slave states in the U.S. choose to secede from the Union because they are scared of the abolition of slavery, which is their main economic strategy. The Union and the Confederacy are in a standoff until someone in South Carolina fires at another. The American Civil War begins with a slew of northern losses at Bull Run and beyond, and the Union plan to blitz Richmond fails fucking miserably. The Confederates have a plan to spearhead Pennsylvania and force the Union into ceding freedom to them. So, the South, in 1862, begin their offensive and meet no resistance until Antietam. The Union forces make a stand at the Battle of Antietam, and the Confederates, unprepared for the pure scale of loss it caused, retreated back into the South, failing the mission. The Battle of Antietam is still to this day the deadliest 24 hours in American history. The Emancipation Proclamation is signed by Abraham Lincoln, forcing Britain and France to stay neutral because they were leaning towards the South because their cotton was being bombarded and sanctioned basically by the North because they didn't want any more money going to the South. And the Union now has a far more of a chance of winning this.
Oh god, it's General Whiskey!
Ulysses S. Grant was a man of incredible recklessness. Recklessness, however, is exactly what worked. Lincoln sent Grant on a campaign to capture the Mississippi, and on July 4, 1863, he reached the bank, cutting off Texas for the Confederacy. The Confederates tried another time to save the war by blitzing up in Pennsylvania, but this time the Union was far more ready. The Battle of Gettysburg is the bloodiest battle in all of American history, killing or wounding around 51,000 people. Abraham Lincoln visited the site of the battle after the fact and summarized America in the span of 3 minutes. Back down south, William Sherman spearheads to cause complete chaos in the south and breach to Atlanta, succeeding through living off the land they then torch. Elections come up and Lincoln still wins by a landslide, and overall the war is essentially over. The South has lost. Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse on April 9, 1865. The Southern sympathizers go into hiding and begin the KKK. Racist ideology. America was racist, there's no denying that. Almost everyone was when it was a normal thing to do. In America, though, it was far bigger of an issue. Slavery was only officially abolished in the U.S. after Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, which was only in the southern states. It wasn't actually outlawed in the United States normally until Lincoln was assassinated in 1865, and Congress decided, let's pay a tribute to him. African Americans weren't even given citizenship until after he was assassinated, and it took a few years to pass, not even passing until 1860. And even after that, there was still discrimination and segregation in most of the U.S. It took Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks being figures in the civil rights movement in the 1960s just to get segregation undone, which was 100 years after the Civil War, mind you. And even today, especially in the South, people are still prejudiced against minority races: Asians, Native Americans, Hispanics, African Americans, etc., etc., etc. It depends on where you live. Like in New Hampshire, we don't have many open racists, but get too far south and you'll find an army of fucking openly racist people in white cone hats ready to fight. It's sad. Sexist ideology. This could also be technically misogynist ideology, but either or. Women and men, the two binaries for the entirety of history. For almost all of it, men have been the domineers in society. They work, they lead, they fight, they provide. Women have been the submissors. They raise, they birth, they serve, they provide. But in the 1800s, the women's rights movement across the world had been swinging at the legislature, and after the Civil War, it reached the US. Americans didn't take well to women speaking out at first, but eventually most people started to agree. Many legislators actually met with women in the movement in order to try and pass laws to equalize them to men. However, there are always sympathizers to conservatism. Sexists and misogynists that held any power whatsoever verbally opposed any idea to give women any rights that were men exclusive at the time. Some even called for women who were wishing for more rights to lose more as punishment, basically putting them into slavery. Alas, they couldn't stop the speeding wall of change, and in 1920, women gained the right to vote. As today stands, all genders have the same rights as each other, but women had to work much harder to get there, which is truly upsetting. Homophobic ideology. One more of these and we get to the 1900s. Homophobia had been around for as long as the Bible has. Spartan armies encouraged gay relationships to increase soldier morale, but that's not relevant to the United States. That's just me being really, really pissy. Homophobia was never really a problem for America until the arising of the LGBTQ community. At least, not publicly or on the news. Gay people being bad was just kind of a normal idea that every child knew growing up. Even kids who were gay believed they were bad people for being like that, or thinking like that. Once pro-homosexual communities arose in the United States, however, things began to shift once again. Except, unlike with women's rights, gay rights had far more pushback. And I say far more because they're still getting pushback today.
Yeah, little editor's clarification here. This is not meant to be like a diss at women's rights. You don't hear nearly as much about women's rights being attacked on the news, and nearly as much as you hear about like gay and trans rights being attacked on the news. You hear way more about the LGBTQ community than you do the feminist movement in 2026. That's what I was trying to talk about here. Apologies to any women in the audience.
Given a majority of the U.S. was, and still is, Christian, homophobia was an integral part of American belief. So when that sheltered belief was challenged, the retaliation was major. Protests against LGBTQ rights were large and constant, and they still are today. Trans people are considered terrorists by the government, which is stupid. In the Supreme Court case Obergefell v. Hodges, same-sex marriage was ruled a fundamental right by the Marriage and Equal Protection Clauses of the 14th Amendment. To this day, there are many people who wish for this to be undone, and as of 2025, there was a plan forwarded by a former judge who was fired, by the way, for a reason, to have the Supreme Court overturn Obergefell on the grounds of religious freedom, which is once again absolutely fucking disgusting. The Spanish-American War. The USS Maine was sent to Havana, Cuba, to support American interests during a Cuban revolt. That ship never made it back to the mainland. The USS Maine's explosion sparked the Spanish-American War. Whether it was a ploy to cause a war or not, we will never know. And it was the first 20th century example that colonialism was not going to survive. Technically, it was like right before the 1900s or the 20th century, but I still count it as the 20th century because it's close enough. From this war, the American giant beat the ever-loving shit out of Spain and annexed Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippine Islands. All of this will be important later. Later. World War I. Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in an open-top car in Sarajevo. World War I is a complete and utter massacre. I won't explain that entire conflict here because it would take too long, but the important part is in 1917. In 1917, Germany resumed its submarine warfare in the Pacific and continued to pummel American civilian ships. The final straw that broke the camel's back was the Zimmermann telegram, a message from Germany to Mexico to invade the United States and distract them from Europe. Unfortunately for Germany, this was intercepted by Britain and brought to the US. Mexico never joined the war. The US began sending tanks and troops to assist the Entente in obliterating the Central Powers by the thousands, mind you. World War I ends with the mostly Entente victory. I say mostly because in the East, the Soviets have taken control of the Russian beast. This will be important later. The Great Depression. The Great War has ended! Rejoice! Or don't, because everyone's broke. Britain and France relied on American loans throughout the war, and Germany was meant to pay their debts as well as the funding for the American debts. However, they had nothing to their name either because their industry was too deep in war mode, and most of it was bombed to death during the World War I. Thus began the Great Depression, the greatest drought of money in American history. Being poor was now more common than dying before 17 during the earliest days of the state. Racism and anti-Semitism spiked as people in America attempted to find a scapegoat to blame for this poverty problem, and yet it was for nothing. Until Franklin Delano Roosevelt. See, Franklin was a smart guy, and he was going to prove it by getting the U.S. out of this depression. He signed a new deal to give jobs and relief aid to the United States people and cleared the Social Security Act. These did not pull the United States fully out of the depression. That didn't happen until World War II, but they did major efforts to the people of the time. Now, make no mistake, Roosevelt is not a good person, we'll talk about that soon, but this deal was a good thing for the nation. World War II. December 7th, 1941.
A day that will live on in infamy.
The Japanese launched a surprise attack on the military base at Pearl Harbor, dragging the United States into the bloodiest war in human history. The first attack on U.S. soil from a foreign nation since 1814. Japan had woken the sleeping giant. You fucking idiots. The American policy of Europe first was established, and Germany was about to feel America on their soil again. First, though, they needed to get there. Crossing the Atlantic and obliterating the African front within a year wasn't the issue, it was reaching Europe, which was now a fortress due to Germany and Italy wiping the floor with all of the West. And most of the East, too. Churchill wanted to go from the English Channel, America wanted to go from the Mediterranean. They started in Italy, landing in Sicily, and the men, not wanting to fight their literal siblings who moved to America for a better life during the Italian-American immigration crisis, openly revolted and threw Mussolini out with the help of the Senate. Eventually, Mussolini was reinstated in a German-Italian puppet government, and the winter grew the conflict to a stalemate. Alright, Britain, let's do your way, too. June 6, 1944, American, Canadian, British, and French troops landed in Normandy and broke through the German defenses to France. Every line breaks simultaneously, the Soviets in the east, the Allies in Italy and France, and with no other options, Hitler shoots himself in his bunker with his wife and dog and Germany surrenders. Now, Japan. They've been ravaging the Pacific front since the war started, and it's time for a little bit of blowback. During the Battle of Midway, Japan lost so hard that many of the Japanese nationalists retreated simply out of fear, which is something that you never see from Japan because those people, at least during Imperial Japan, the Imperial Japanese era, were so incredibly patriotic that they would rather kill themselves than go home after losing a battle. Anyway, the Japanese Navy would never recover from this loss. Not even today. The U.S. would continue its island-hopping campaign for some time, and over in America, all Japanese Americans on the West Coast area were taken into custody and imprisoned in internment camps. This would cause a wave of Asian racism, this term being thrown around to describe any and all internment campees. This was why Franklin D. Roosevelt wasn't all good. Paranoia took the better of him here. Eventually, America had a choice. One was do a grueling island campaign on the Japanese mainland, possibly extend the war by years and millions of deaths, capture Tokyo and force Hirohito's hand, or use a new weapon. The Manhattan Project had concluded, and with it, the atomic bomb was created. On August 6, 1945, Hiroshima was reduced to rubble by Little Boy. On August 9, 1945, Nagasaki was dealt the same fate by Fat Man. 6 days later, on August 15, 1945, Japan surrendered to the United States of America, officially ending World War II. America would go on to occupy Japan for 7 years. The use of the bombs is still a morally debated topic to this day. The atomic age. The nuclear weapon was the cause the world needed to stop stabbing each other over the last slice of pie. A single one of these menaces could level a city, and enough could level entire populations, or the planet. Over the course of the Cold War, more expensive and far more destructive variants of the bomb would be made, confirming that if any great power were to go to war, the women...
It sounds like I'm saying women. No, I meant weapon.
would destroy the world, and we would go out like the dinosaurs, but by our own hands. As of 2025, the only countries who have nuclear weapons are the United States, Russia, China, India, Pakistan, the UK, France, Israel, North Korea, and my script says possibly Iran until we
Bombed them in March.
The fact that we are even trust a single nation with this power is repulsive at best, deadly at worst. If we are to make it past this anniversary, this creation must either be forgotten, all out destroyed, or simply removed from the hands of anybody, or we as a species will kill each other. And ourselves along with it. The Cold War. The USSR is a big state. It is a scary state. America is scared of the big scary state. Therefore, they're mean to each other. The Cold War never went hot because of the idea of mutually assured destruction. Mad is the idea that if nukes are used against another nation, the world will fucking end. There were so many events in the Cold War that I simply can't say all of them here, so here's a summary as much I can muster. Korea was split in two after World War II. North Korea is communist, and South Korea is capitalist. North Korea invades South Korea. South Korea gets UN support and kicks North Korea back. China backs North Korea, and there's a stalemate. Nobody wins the Korean War. Later, the USSR ships missiles into Cuba, and after a communist revolution, overtook the island and declared independence from the United States. And the war almost goes hot. I'm going to talk about that, though. A single strangely attractive Russian man stops the launching of nuclear submarines to the United States, and Kennedy realizes that all Khrushchev really wanted was American missiles removed from Turkey. Well, that would have been a much better avoided problem. Our other major conflict happened in Vietnam. North Vietnam is communist, South Vietnam is capitalist. North Vietnam invades South Vietnam. South Vietnam gets American support and loses. Why?
Jungle.
Vietnam has a lot of jungle, and guerrilla warfare overtook the American forces. Eventually, America can't take the heat, both outside the country and in, with the Make Love Not War movement spreading across the entire nation during that time period. And they pull out of Vietnam, letting the South fall to communism. Thus, the butterfly effect takes full control of the manic and high U.S. population, and a Red Scare happens again. However, no need to fear, Gorbachev is here, and he gives the people of the USSR freedom, and they use that freedom to leave the Eastern Bloc, the Warsaw Pact, and the USSR at large. Boom, the US won the Cold War as of December 24th, 1991. But it's not over yet, because it only takes an hour to break peace. The War on Terror. On September 11th, 2001, at 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 was hijacked and flown into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. At 9:03, Flight 173 hit the South Tower. At 9:37, Flight 77 hit the Pentagon. The South Tower collapsed at 9:59, and the North Tower collapsed at 10:28. Finally, the fourth plane, Flight 93, while hijacked, was crashed by its passengers in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. For the first time since Pearl Harbor, America was attacked on their own soil. The events of September 11th are highly memed about by the world at large. I'm not gonna lie, I used to do it too. But there is no laughing about the unnecessary 2,997 people that were killed in the attacks. 9/11 sparked a rage in American hearts they had never felt before. The Department of Homeland Security was created, and the war on terror began. Target 1, Al-Qaeda. The war began with the U.S. dropping battle bus style into Afghanistan to take out Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, which we were partly responsible for placing there, but we don't talk about that. Al-Qaeda pussied out of the country, and we stayed trying to take down the Taliban until the worst retreat in American history in 2021. The withdrawal from Afghanistan led by Joe Biden left somewhere from hundreds to possibly thousands of American hostages in the country and millions of dollars worth of American weaponry in the hands of the Taliban. Back in 2003, Iraq gets obliterated. The country tried its luck with Kuwait and got its ass handed to it back in the 90s, and Osama bin Laden was hiding away in a hospital in Baghdad. The US military went into the country and killed him on sight without any consideration. ISIS and Al-Qaeda would continue to expand and fight US influence in the Middle East, especially in Iraq and Syria, for the next 20 years. As of now, we've drawn back from that area mostly, but we are still involved in the chaos without consent by the nation. Modern day. Today, America is considered a widely lost cause. Our citizens are distrustful as ever towards the government, agencies are testing the very limits of their power, and the billions of documents containing the worst pedophile ring in human history are being let out to dry after being used as toilet paper. We have gotten them released now, however, nothing's being done about it. What the fuck? Just in January, the United States military invaded Venezuela and took their narco-terrorist leader just to place in the government head who suppressed celebration of the event by the people. Not to mention Trump had pardoned and indicted narco-terrorists in Honduras not a month earlier. And we've attacked Iran, who we cannot win a war against without nuclear weapons, which we've already decided is a horrible idea for you. We are falling apart. Truly, as much as I hate to be political on this channel, I cannot stress the amount of fucked that we are. We've been trying to buy Greenland to no avail, we've made a barely fragile peace in Israel, we've bombed Yemeni, Somalian, and Iranian shipping vessels, and the destruction in the streets is causing police responses that only make everything worse. Our economy is currently propped up by AI, which will eventually be a popping bubble and send us into a recession worse than the Great Depression, and we still can't make anything here because all our industry is in China and our gas pipeline is dysfunctional. We are engaged in a pseudo-war with a nation we cannot fight against, and we are attempting to defuse the situation through bloodshed, which is not going to work. Our leadership killed multiple Iranian government members and still seem to pretend that they are in the right. Americans are divided almost as much as they were before the American Civil War, and the polarization of everything has gone too far. I don't know how long we can stretch this metaphorical putty until it splits into two, but we are pushing its limits. The Democrats are trying to defund the DHS, which is a horrible idea. The Republicans are trying to justify neo-Nazi ideology, which is a horrible idea. And we as citizens are left to watch, hopeless as the government that doesn't listen to us anymore tears itself apart bit by bit. ISIS killed multiple U.S. citizens out of self-defense retaliation, quote-unquote, and protesters are putting themselves in harm's way to protect illegal immigrants, therefore making the agency look even worse. Our government no longer gives fucks or shits about us. They care about the power that being in Congress, in the cabinet, in the Oval Office, in the Supreme Court gives them. If I had any speaking voice in my house or was a legal adult, I would be saying this in front of a crowd of people in Concord. When the people's reactions to an oppressive government ties into their propagandist clutches, we are nothing more than the pawns they want us to be. Don't fall for the rage bait and don't fall for the lies. There is no shadow government. It has become our own. It hides the atrocities behind the very shadows it used to be in, shining the light on you, the people, so you are none the wiser. The United States has been through a lot in its time. For breaking up with Britain over taxes, to the towers falling, it has lived on and fought hard. We as a nation are more than the beliefs and power and hatred we hold towards each other, no matter what either side of the news may tell you. We are the people who run this nation, the state who is supposed to give an example of what a nation is, the first and only global superpower. Why should we fight for our states or only ourselves and personal beliefs when we can fight for our homeland, the greatest and most free nation to ever exist? If you stand for nothing, what will you fall for? If our nation can survive as long as it has with as much turmoil as it has had, we can go further. All we have to do is stay. Stay together as the United States of America. I would like to end this video by reciting one of the most influential speeches in American history and a perfect summary of what we as a nation should be. The Gettysburg Address. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it, far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here, dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, and that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.